Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling alchemy. It's this fascinating historical pursuit just brimming with ambition, with a mystery, and really humanity's earliest attempts to grapple with what matter is.
Absolutely. And for centuries, you had this powerful draw. The idea you could turn base metals into gold, find some kind of universal cure, maybe even live forever.
Right, and it's a story that happens before we even have the word chemistry. It's this sort of proto-scientific thing that popped up in different places, didn't it?
It really did, and that's what's so interesting. It wasn't just a precursor to science. It was this complex tradition, blending science, philosophy, even spirituality. And you find versions of it in China, India, the Muslim world, Europe. Quite distinct traditions, actually.
Okay, let's dig into the word itself, alchemy. It feels old, has a kind of resonance. Where does it come from?
Well, the etymology is layered. You've got the Arabic alchemy, which is key, but there are hints of older roots, too. Maybe the Egyptian kim, meaning black earth.
Black earth, like a Nile soy.
Exactly, suggesting a connection to the land, to resources. And then there's the Greek chaimeia, meaning fusion or casting, pointing towards practical crafts like metallurgy. So the word itself hints at these diverse origins, mixing craft and ideas.
And the core idea seems to be transformations, right? This drive to purify things, perfect them.
That's it, precisely. A belief that matter wasn't static, that it had this inherent drive towards perfection. Gold was the ultimate symbol of that perfection, incorruptible.
So transmutation wasn't just changing stuff chemically.
Not in our modern sense, no. It was bigger. It could be about changing the body, physiology, or even about, spiritual transformation. They had this worldview, as above, so below, this deep connection between the cosmos and us down here.
And the idea that all metals were basically aiming for gold status anyway.
Kind of, yeah. The medieval view was often that elements were just different levels of purity, of some primordial stuff. So turning lead into gold wasn't magic, it was just speeding up nature's plan.
Okay, so our mission for this deep dive. Let's trace these ideas, see how they traveled, and maybe find some echoes in our world today. Where do we start? Ancient world.
Egypt is definitely a key starting point for the Western tradition. That Kome Black Earth connection is potent. But really, Hellenistic Egypt, Alexandria specifically, was crucial.
Why Alexandria?
Because that's where Egyptian craft skills, metalworking, dyeing, that sort of thing really met Greek natural philosophy. That fusion created the bedrock for Western alchemy.
And there was a spiritual side right away. Like this knowledge was special, maybe divine.
Very much so. The Egyptians saw this kind of hidden knowledge as a gift from Thoth, their god of wisdom. Later, he gets merged with the Greek Hermes, becoming Hermes Trismegistus, a hugely important figure.
Right, Hermes Trismegistus. We'll come back to him.
We will. And even recent research suggests Roman-era alchemy was drawing on Egyptian goldsmithing, Greek ideas, local religions. It was a melting pot. We even have physical proof, like the Stockholm and Leyden papyri from around the 3rd century AD.
What is it?
Recipes, essentially. How to dye things to look like purple, how to make fake gems, even imitate gold and silver. Early practical alchemy.
It's amazing that while this was happening, similar ideas were possibly emerging independently elsewhere, like China.
Yes, and maybe even earlier. Chinese alchemy is deeply tied to medicine and the quest for immortality. It's strongly linked with Taoism. Lao Tzu is often mentioned in connection with it.
Immortality. That's a big goal.
Huge. Their oldest known alchemical text, the Chui Sun Qi from the 2nd century AD, already blends these ideas with classic Chinese philosophy, like the I Ching.
Did they approach it the same way, trying to make elixirs from minerals?
They did that, yes, the outer elixirs using minerals, sometimes toxic ones like mercury and arsenic and plants, but they also had a whole other path, the inner elixir.
Inner elixir, what does that mean?
It involved practices like specific exercises, meditation, working with their vital energy, their qi. It was more holistic, working on the body and spirit from the inside out.
Fascinating. And India had its own version too, Rasayana.
Indeed. Raisayana, the path of essence. Similar aims again, transmutation, the elixir of life. It was influenced by tantric practices, and they used mercury and other metals in medicines.
Mercury seems to pop up a lot.
It does, and interestingly, the Vedas, ancient Indian texts, link gold with long life. And the very first mention of mercury anywhere in the world seems to be in an Indian text, the Arthashastra, way back in the 4th or 3rd century BC.
Wow. So these ideas are bubbling up in different places. How did they spread to Greece then?
Largely through philosophers. Aristotle's theory of the 4 elements, earth, water, air, fire, became really influential. Early Greek and Roman alchemy often focused more on mythology and spiritual aspects, linking immortality with the divine.
And that's where Hermeticism comes in.
Yes, emerging in the Hellenistic period, attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, it became a massive influence. And as we said, some think Greek alchemy actually started in Egypt anyway.
Then the focus shifts, right, to the Middle East.
Absolutely crucial. After the rise of Islam in the 7th and 8th centuries, there was this incredible period of absorbing knowledge. They encountered alchemical traditions, especially in Egypt, and ran with them.
Translation was key.
Monumentally important. Scholars translated Greek and Egyptian texts into Arabic, preserving knowledge that might have been lost and, crucially, building on it. The Islamic Golden Age saw huge leaps in theory, practice, lab techniques.
Any key figures from that time?
Oh, definitely. Jabir ibn Hayyan, known as Geber in the West, often called the father of early chemistry, and Al-Razi, or Ruzis, who was brilliant at classifying substances and really pushed experimentation. They were deeply invested in this stuff. And they held the Emerald Tablet in very high regard.
Okay, so from all these different streams, we start to see common threads, core ideas crystallizing. What were they?
Well, you have that central triad: transmutation, purification, and perfection.
We touched on transmutation changing essence. What about purification?
It was about removing impurities, dross, not just from metals, but importantly from the alchemist's own soul, striving for an ideal pure state.
And perfection is gold.
Gold is the ultimate symbol of material perfection, yeah. Incorruptible, noble, but it also stood for spiritual enlightenment, flawlessness of the soul.
And the four elements, earth, air, fire, water, they were central to how they thought this worked.
Absolutely, but not elements like on our periodic table. They were more like principles defined by qualities. Hot, cold, wet, dry.
And you could change them.
That was the belief. By altering the qualities, making something hot become cold or dry become wet, you could theoretically transmute one element into another. And since everything was made of these elements in different proportions...
You could change one substance into another, like lead into gold.
Exactly. That was the theoretical underpinning.
Right.
And each element had its own symbols, its own weight of meaning.
Then later, these three primes show up: mercury, salt, and sulfur. What were they about?
They became another key framework, especially thanks to people like Jabir and later Paracelsus. They represented different aspects of existence.
Like what?
Mercury was often linked to the spirit or mind fluid, volatile. Salt represented the body fixed, stable. And sulfur was the soul, combustible, active, transformative.
So the balance of these three determined what a substance was.
Pretty much. Understanding and manipulating the balance of mercury, salt, and sulfur was seen as vital for any alchemical transformation. Again, each had its own symbol and characteristics.
It's getting complex. And underpinning a lot of this, especially in the West, was the Emerald Tablet you mentioned.
Hugely significant. Attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, it's this short, cryptic text, but foundational.
And it contains that famous line.
As above, so below, yes. Yeah. It sums up that core Hermetic idea of correspondence, the idea that the macrocosm, the universe, is reflected in the microcosm in us, and vice versa. Everything's deeply linked. Its mysteries were thought to hold the key to creating the stone, so it was central to alchemical study and practice.
So let's trace that journey a bit more clearly. We have the Egyptian Hellenistic roots.
Hermeticism providing the philosophical juice, Alexandria as the incubator. We get figures like Zosimos, maybe the first alchemist we can name historically, and Maria the Jewess, credited with inventing labgue like the Bain-Marie.
But there were setbacks, books burned.
Yeah, stories like the burning of texts in Alexandria hint at challenges, lost knowledge. But then the Islamic Golden Age really carries the torch.
Right, 8th to 13th centuries. Translation, innovation.
Huge advances. Jabir's sulfur-mercury theory of metals, Al-Razi's systematic approach, they were seriously trying to make gold and find the elixir.
And then this knowledge flows back into Europe.
Starting around the 12th century, yes, through Latin translations from Arabic, this sparks the medieval European alchemical tradition.
Still chasing the stone.
Oh, yes. Often shrouded in secrecy, using complex symbols. Think of figures like Paracelsus in the 16th century. He really pushed the medical side, iatrochemistry, and emphasized the three primes.
And the legends, like Nicholas Flamel.
Exactly. The story that he actually succeeded, found the stone, achieved immortality that captured the imagination for centuries.
But while Europe is doing this, China and India are on their own tracks.
Pretty much. Chinese Taoist alchemy is still focused on immortality, using elixirs, but also those internal energy practices, qigong. Indian Rasayana is aiming for longevity, physical perfection, drawing on Ayurveda and Tantra, maybe some later cross-pollination, but distinct paths for a long time.
It really drives home that this wasn't just about making gold, was it? What were they really after?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Or maybe the gold question.
Yeah.
Yes, Chrysopoeia, making gold, was a goal, and the elixir of life, immortality. The philosopher's stone was the key to both.
But the stone was more than just a magical substance.
For many, absolutely. It was a powerful metaphor. It stood for spiritual enlightenment, for inner perfection, for wisdom, the gold of wisdom.
You see symbols like the squared circle in alchemical drawings.
Right. That often represents the stone itself or the process of creating it. It symbolizes uniting the four elements, reconciling opposites like spirit and matter, male and female achieving wholeness.
And the elixir, the quest for immortality that seems universal.
Deeply human. And they tried various things, mineral concoctions, but also spiritual practices to purify the body and soul. The Chinese idea of drinkable gold captures that potent hope.
So even the metallic transmutation turning lead to gold had a deeper meaning.
Very much so. On one level, they saw it as speeding up a natural process, but symbolically, it was about transforming the lead of the ignorant, base self into the gold of the enlightened, perfected soul.
Inner transformation.
Exactly. For many serious alchemists, that spiritual dimension, that inner work, was the real point. The physical experiments were, in a way, reflections or tools for that inner journey. That whole process was the magnum opus, the great work.
It's quite a leap from that to modern chemistry. How did that transition happen? Because alchemy, for all its mysticism, did lay some groundwork, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely crucial groundwork. Think about the practical side. Alchemists developed or refined so much basic lab equipment we still recognize.
Like what?
Beakers, crucibles, stills for distillation, filters, stirring rods, the alembic. And the techniques.
Right.
Distillation, sublimation, filtration, crystallization, calcination. These are fundamental chemical processes they mastered through centuries of trial and error.
And they try to organize substances.
They made early attempts, yes, grouping things by properties. It wasn't systematic like our periodic table, but it was a start, contributing to that way of thinking. So the hands-on knowledge, the experimental approach, even if the theories were, well, sometimes off base, provided an essential foundation.
So when did this shift really happen? Toward science as we know it.
It was gradual, but the 17th century was a key period in Europe. You start seeing a much stronger emphasis on rational thought, on empirical evidence, people demanding proof you could actually see and measure.
Key figures driving this.
Robert Boyle is a big one, often called the father of modern chemistry. He stressed experimentation, offered a clearer definition of chemical elements, moved towards a more mechanical view of matter with his corpuscularian hypothesis.
Yeah, and Lavoisier later on.
Antoine Lavoisier, late 18th century. His work on conservation of mass, his insistence on quantitative measurements, weighing things carefully before and after reactions, really cemented chemistry as a rigorous quantitative science.
So the rise of the scientific method, reproducible experiments, testable hypotheses, that's what sidelined alchemy.
Pretty much. As science got better at explaining things reliably, the mystical claims and often secretive, hard-to-replicate methods of alchemy lost credibility in the mainstream intellectual world. The focus shifted squarely to evidence-based study of matter.
Science and mysticism started to part ways.
A definite separation began, yes. Science focused on the observable, testable, rational, leaving the more spiritual or symbolic aspects behind.
But then, interestingly, those symbolic aspects found a whole new life, didn't they? With Carl Jung.
Ah, yes. Jung's interpretation is fascinating and hugely influential. He saw alchemy not primarily as bad chemistry, but as a kind of symbolic map of the psyche's journey towards wholeness.
You thought alchemists were projecting.
Unconsciously, yes. Projecting their own inner struggles, transformations, and aspirations onto the materials they were working with. He studied alchemical texts and symbols intensely and saw reflections of deep psychological processes.
So the great work wasn't just about chemicals. It was about individuation.
Exactly. Jung saw the magnum opus, the alchemical journey, as a powerful analogy for psychological individuation, that lifelong process of integrating all the different parts of yourself, conscious and unconscious, into a coherent whole.
And the stages of alchemy mirrored psychological stages.
He drew direct parallels. The nigredo, the blackening or dissolution stage, he linked to confronting the shadow self. The albedo, the whitening or purification, to integrating the anima or animus. citrinitas, the yellowing to wisdom or dawning consciousness, and the rubedo, the reddening or final stage, to achieving the integrated self wholeness.
And all those strange symbols, dragons, serpents, hermaphrodites.
Jung saw them as archetypes, universal patterns of the collective unconscious manifesting in the alchemist's visions and writings. The prima materia, the starting stuff, was the raw, unconscious psyche. The philosopher's stone was the goal, the integrated, fully realized self.
So even if alchemy didn't deliver literal gold, its legacy seems incredibly rich, both scientifically and psychologically.
Undeniably. On the science side, we have the tools, the techniques, the early classifications, the accumulated knowledge of substances. That's a direct lineage to modern chemistry.
And medicine, too.
Definitely. Paracelsus and iatrochemistry bringing chemistry into medicine, the exploration of mineral and plant remedies. Even spagyrics, a kind of plant-based alchemy, continues today as a holistic therapy. Paracelsus basically founded toxicology too. The dose makes the poison.
And then the huge impact on Jungian psychology.
Profound and lasting. The language of symbols, transformation, archetypes, individuation, it's deeply indebted to alchemical imagery.
It's interesting, even today, you sometimes hear echoes in fields like nanotechnology, material science, manipulating matter at a fundamental level.
There are certainly parallels in the ambition, aren't there? That desire to transform matter at the smallest scales to create something new. Of course, the science is completely different. And, well, modern nuclear physics has achieved elemental transmutation, just not with alembics and furnaces.
Right. Though maybe not turning lead into gold economically.
Not quite. And you occasionally see alchemical ideas' interconnectedness, the nature of reality resurface in discussions around quantum physics, though that often gets labeled quantum mysticism and meets with a lot of scientific skepticism.
So wrapping this up, alchemy feels like humanity's first big, comprehensive swing at understanding transformation itself, doesn't it? Before we carved everything up into separate sciences.
I think that's a great way to put it. It had this holistic view, cosmos, nature, human spirit, all interwoven. And while science moved on from its material claims, the richness of its philosophy remains.
And the power of its symbols, especially seen through Jung's eyes, still speaks to us about personal growth, finding wholeness.
Absolutely. Its influence runs deep in art, literature, esoteric thought. It tapped into something fundamental about the human desire for meaning and transformation.
So maybe the alchemist didn't find the physical philosopher's stone, but the quest itself, the ideas, the symbols, they left behind something else of enduring value.
I think so. Timeless insights into who we are and our potential to change, to grow, to perhaps transmute ourselves.
A really provocative thought to end on. Maybe consider this. How does that ancient, persistent desire for transformation, both out there in the world and inside ourselves, still echo in what we pursue today, scientifically and personally? Join us next time for another deep dive.